Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Jayney Goddard. I'm president of the Complementary Medical Association, and today I am joined by none other than Dr. Frank Sabatino. Frank, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to having this time with you.
Yeah, it's really exciting actually, because for those of you who don't know who are watching, Dr. Frank is the Complementary Medical Association's Director of Science and Research. And we're very, very privileged to have him. But the reason for talking to Frank today is because of this incredible book. It's called Weightless, Compassionate Weight Loss for Life. And in fact, actually, he's got some incredible reviews already with Colin Campbell, who wrote the China study, and various others, saying that the book is the most important book on obesity ever written. So, Frank, why did you write this book? It's amazing. Tell us all about it.
Well, I think people, are just unaware that the biggest pandemic that we're really dealing with is not anything related to viral infection, as we have been dealing with over the recent years. It's really the pandemic of excessive weight and body fat that is a global problem. I mean, the world has now topped 3 billion overweight people. That's 40% of the world. And in the next 10 years, it's going to be 50% of the world. And unfortunately, the dieting industry is a 70 to 80 billion dollar industry with a 95 to 98% failure rate. So when you think about the fact that what people are turning to to address this really, pandemic problem is really something that's been a woeful failure. And even worse, they've been led to believe that the only way that they can take weight off is by adopting fad diets that are grounded in animal-based and processed foods, or with pharmaceutical intervention that has a number of adverse effects that is actually done better by whole plant food. So I wanted to really take the time, if I could, to present the full panorama, the full constellation of factors, including food, lifestyle factors, and even psycho-emotional factors that can assure more sustainable long-term weight loss without the adverse consequences that typically occur with many of these fad and pharmaceutical approaches, and also to dispel the unconscionable lie that the only way people can achieve health and weight loss goals is by opting for industries that are involved with the violence and death of animals and the devastation of our own environment. So it had a multifold purpose to address the real successful approaches in lifestyle, but also to make people aware that, your weight loss and health goals do not have to involve the devastation to animals in our environment.
That's so important, and thank you so much for explaining that. So why? I mean, there are so many diet books out there. They're all coming from a place of kind of deprivation and lack, and the myth of calories in, calories out, and so on. Tell me a little bit about the way that you feel that people should be looking at this and how it's so very, very different. I know you've touched on it briefly, but if you can take a little bit of a deeper dive so that people who are looking at getting this book, they kind of know what to expect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the book starts with what I like to refer to as essential fundamentals, because I think we have a very archaic notion of thinking about how we're going to provide our nutritional needs. And you made a really important point. In most people's minds, the idea for weight regulation or reducing weight and body fat has always been kind of a deprivational model. This idea that I have to just eat less and just move more, and that's going to solve the issue. When in fact, we find that deprivational food programs only reinforce what has been referred to as a starvation response, driving us to become less efficient in how we use calories, so we hold on to them more, and also drive us to have reactive hunger and overeating, which in the long run is not sustainable. The beautiful thing about these fundamentals is that when you opt for whole plant foods, they have a very salient feature about them. Number one, they are remarkably low in calorie density. So when you look at fresh fruits, vegetables, whole plant foods, you're dealing with a fundamental approach that is low in calorie density, that allows you to adopt an idea that it's not about eating less, it's about eating well, and that you can eat huge volumes of low calorie dense vegetables, fruits, and plants and maintain incredible sustainable healthy weight and fat across time. So this idea that, the kinds of calories you're taking in, the kinds of foods and the density of the calories they provide are really one of the big secrets of a whole plant eating approach, plus the fact that all of the macronutrients and micronutrients that we need to sustain health and weight loss are remarkably contained in foods, including protein and fat and all those things that we have historically all been brought up to believe have to be provided by animal-based foods. It's an archaic notion. It's a biological lie. It's an untenable statement. And unfortunately, it's been foisted on the population, and it's created its own, issues of disease and damage across time. And then when you start to realize that other lifestyle factors, in addition to food, including how we move, how we sleep, the environmental toxins that we're exposed to, the issues of addiction that are created by the industries of food sales and food procurement and the ways that things are sold in the marketplace, all of these things conspire to feed, if you will, this pandemic of obesity. And so the book really gets into starting with the fundamentals of plant exclusive nutrition, talking about why that's the best approach for human beings to maintain health and weight regulation. And then it moves into the ideas of how those foods balance hormones, how the lifestyle factors of sleep and activity, et cetera, are feeding our ability to maintain healthier weight and body fat, and even the role of environmental toxins in how they play a role in kind of conspiring to increase weight and body fat. So it takes a much bigger kind of holistic view of the constellation of factors while reinforcing why a plant exclusive approach provides you the best raw material for maintaining sustainable weight and body fat.
Okay. There are so many sort of diets out there that are sort of contrary to what you're talking about. I'm thinking about things like the carnivore diet, for example, and obviously things like keto diets and so on. What do we say to people who are sort of warmly embracing those because they're buying into this myth that those are safe and effective? Let's just, maybe talk about those for a little bit and
Well, fundamentally, those diets, again, they all center around the use of animal-based foods. And the fundamental idea that as human primates, that we are basically herbivorous. We're a combination herbivore, frugivore. We are not built in any way, shape, or form to handle the kinds of foods that carnivores are actually eating. We don't have the digestive tract, the dentition, we don't have the enzymes, we don't have the space in our gut to handle these foods. And it's not that we can't eat them, because at various times in our history we have, and there are still populations that consume animal-based foods. But the byproduct, the price we pay for the inflammatory and oxidative stress that's imposed by these acid-forming animal-based foods is something that's linked with most of the major pathologies that we suffer with. For example, we have a huge population of organisms in our body, what we call the microbiota or microbiome. That population of organisms is only fed by one thing, and that's the fiber in plants, the soluble fibers in fruits and vegetables. This is not provided by any animal-based food. Those organisms play a major role in the balance of the immune system, in satiety signals to the brain, and how we regulate food intake. So when we're eating these diets, whether it's a carnivore diet or a paleo diet or a keto diet, there's no real justification in the population of human primates for any benefit associated with those. For example, when we look at fat, it's the most calorie dense food. It's 9 calories per gram versus protein and starches and carbohydrates, which are only 4. So when you're eating a lot of more fat containing food, you're inundating the body with high calorie density. And we know when that high calorie density comes in, it creates a number of problems, including weight gain and body fat. So you take a keto diet that can be anywhere from 65 to 90% fat. There is no human being that was created. There's no primate that can function on a 90% fat diet. We're looking at a diet that really should be somewhere in the range of about 15% fat at the highest end. And how do we know that? Because when we put people on diets that are 15% or lower, studies by Ornish and Esselstyn and others have showed an absolute reversal of heart disease. Once those fat levels start to go up, the increase in cardiovascular damage, the increased disease, the increase in fat and weight gain is remarkably much higher. So the bottom line is diets that are high in protein, whether they're carnivorous diets, or animal protein, or paleo diets, once again, we are not geared for eating a diet that's 30 to 50% protein, and certainly not from animal origin. And when we do that, we see problems with liver toxicity. We see a buildup of urea, which really creates kidney malfunction. We see a buildup of things like uric acid. We see exaggerations that are happening in the diet, things like iron in the hemoglobin molecule in the red blood cell of animals, the concentrations of iron that will increase cancer rate and cardiovascular disease. We see things like trimethylamine that's produced by bacteria in the consumption of animal protein. We see a wide range of increases in cardiovascular disease, inflammatory changes, toxicity, and even the outgrowth of cancer. You know, people don't realize in some of the original studies that were done on cancer initiation and propagation were done by the same Colin Campbell that wrote the China study. And his data, when they provided that data a long time ago, they showed that the biggest provocateur for that initiation and propagation of cancer was the protein in animal products. And in those studies, they used casein, which is the protein found in dairy products. So we find that the use of diets that are grounded in animal products, animal bodies, animal foods, extremely high in protein, fat, and exaggerated chemistry related to a number of things we spoke about, are only in contrast to the health and well-being of the human population. And while there may be some initial weight loss that occurs because of the dehydration effects of high protein, or the ketosis because of high ketogenesis when you're eating high fat, they're not sustainable changes, and they increase adverse effects over time. And of course, we need to be about what's going to be sustainable. It doesn't do anybody any good to lose a few pounds of weight loss while mortgaging their health future, only to be confronted with reactive weight gain because of that adverse or fad approach that they've taken. So I've tried to dispel those fads, and the book goes very much into even the historical perspective of why those fads have no place in the human population. And I relate, again, the use of whole plant-exclusive foods to this idea that not only do they provide health as a foundation, they are truly the true and best way for long-term sustainable success and sustainable weight loss, while still optimizing health in the process.
Okay, so to play devil's advocate, there'll be a lot of people out there who are it's that human beings are omnivores. And I guess my response to that, and I don't know if you would agree with this, is yes, just because we can doesn't mean that we should. So, there's a whole sort of ethical argument aside from the brilliantly well set out, biology and biophysical sort of argument that you've just put there. So there's that. But the thing that was coming up for me as we were talking about ketogenic diets, for example, is I'd love your perspective on the way that ketogenic diets actually really seem to help. They have a lot of children, for example, with epilepsy, and ketogenic diets do seem to help them. So I presume that's just a very short-term approach. Is that right? Because they can't sustain.
It's a very short-term effect, because what happens is brain cells, and again, when you're looking at things like epilepsy, or you're looking at changes that go on that involve myelin sheath changes or the lining of nerves in the brain, et cetera, having additional fat content has had some benefit clinically on kind of reinstating the integrity of some of that tissue. The problem is, though, that when we start getting into that high fat content, the impact on vasculature, the impact on blockage diseases in blood vessels to the heart and the brain and vital organs is so profound that we're creating a loss of oxygen and blood supply to vital tissues, because those high fat foods, especially the oils in our diets, are causing such damage to the inner lining of blood vessels, what's called the endothelial lining of blood vessels to the heart, the brain, and other organs. And then once that happens, you get vascular damage, which starts to create clot formation or plaque formation, now blocking oxygen and blood supply. And I think everybody could probably resonate with the idea that if organs and tissues are deprived of their oxygen and blood supply, they're going to start to lose function. And over time, as they lose function, they'll start to degenerate and break down. And that's in fact what we see. These foods are highly acidic in nature, and we find that fruits and vegetables are much more soothing and alkaline. We have, again, I go into all the anatomical arguments for why we are really true herbivores and frugivores and not carnivores. And the fact of the matter is, we can eat those foods to some degree, but we pay a price when they become a mainstay. And it's not that we haven't had to use some of those across time, and it's not that there aren't populations of healthy people that consume small amounts of animal products across time. But the biological argument is so strong for the idea that we as humans, human primates, are true herbivore frugivores, very much like our cousin and relative primates in the natural world, whether it's bonobos, chimps, gorillas. They're basically eating leaves, shoots, stems, etc. And we are animals that are geared for eating those foods. So the key here is, if you are utilizing any of those foods, they need to be such a minuscule part of the diet. And when you realize that you can live with that small amount of animal intake, you realize you can live with no amount of animal intake. Jayney, look, I haven't had animal products since 1971. We're talking about 53, 54 years. And maintaining muscle mass and vitality and energy at this stage of my life, and also having counseled people over the last 45 to 50 years with this diet and seeing the reversal of cancers and heart disease and type 2 diabetes and incredible losses of weight sustainable in hundreds of thousands of people over time. There is no reason to have these foods. Plus the fact, you brought up the other issues, we are at a time when there is such an abomination in the use of land and water resources to support the devastating industries that are based on the violence and torture to animals for food, and the impact that that has on destroying not only animal life, animal rights, but also human bodies and the environment itself. A case can squarely be made that more than 90% of the cause of abnormal climate change on planet Earth is due to animal agriculture. It's due to the creation of industries that are trying to produce and use animals for food. No animal needs to be killed or destroyed for our basic nutritional needs, and certainly not for our weight loss outcomes.
Very important point, and I think, thank you. That is so useful, actually. But you're talking there and saying no animal needs to be killed, and so there are people who will say, in that case, yes, it's okay for me to drink milk, eat dairy, have eggs, and so on. Can we talk about the impact on the environment, upon animal health and well-being and welfare from that perspective? Can we talk about dairy and the egg industry?
You can argue that the dairy industry may be one of the most violent aspects of the animal industry, in the sense that if you're going to start milking cows that are giving birth to calves, well, you've got to take calves away because you can't have them nursing baby calves. So the trauma that is involved in the mother-child bond of animals, and one of the things is we don't invest these creatures with any sense of personhood. But the truth of the matter is they have agency, they have emotion, they have family ties and family structures, as we do. No one would think of taking a mother giving birth to a baby infant and immediately extracting her away from the mother, you carving that baby up for nice, or fostering it into nice veal production, and then milking that human mother until she's dry, and then damaging her, and then eventually slaughtering her in the process. The bottom
After
line
you've
is,
impregnated her goodness knows how many times in order for
yes,
her to have a calf or a
and,
baby
and
and have milk.
and so the idea of not only do dairy products provide their own issues of disease in the sense that you're looking at inflammatory potential, you're looking at abnormal fat content, you're looking at all of that, but these are industries that are tied into the animal agriculture field when you're dealing with ungodly amounts of animals involved in the torture and production of dairy products. Plus the fact that we also know that there's a lot of toxicity that's involved in the generation of milk in the industries, even in the tubing, milking machines that are connecting cows to containers to be sold. You've got environmental toxins in that plastic tubing that's connecting to cows that are getting into the milk supply that are feeding the outcome of obesity. But just from the standpoint of the violence of the dairy industry and the way that you're separating mother, child, and all of the harm and violence involved in that, there is no reason on this planet to use it. And as I made the point, some of the early studies on cancer were done by emphasizing the role of casein, which is dairy protein, as being one of the biggest culprits for cancer initiation and outcome.
Yes.
And not only that, it's also got a whole litany of what are called casomorphines that make them very addictive substances, which is why, I grew up in an Italian household. Getting off of dairy products was probably harder for me than getting off of sugar. There's kind of an addictive quality to the opiate content of milk. So not only in the chemistry of milk, not only in the toxicity of milk, but also the industries around milk production, which are so incredibly brutal to mother and child involved in that process, and the fact that there's no reason for us to consume dairy products on planet Earth. There is no animal in nature that truly consumes milk after the age of weaning and then the milk of another species. Why we feel compelled to do that. And then what we do is we have abnormal, and think about this. Milk is a growth substance. It is actually a food that fosters the growth of the animal that has now been born from that mother of that species. So that milk is designed to match the growth rate of the actual animals that are producing it. So if you think about a baby calf or a cow, they grow to full maturity in 1 to 3 years. Human beings grow across 15 to 20 years. So if you start putting animal milks that are really geared for a much more rapid growth rate, you're creating a rapid growth rate in our species that causes premature maturity development that can be linked with early onset cancers in the breast, ovary, uterus, prostate. I always make the point that, little Johnny is not supposed to be 6'2" at 10 years old. It's supposed to be 6'2", 200 pounds, and looks like, and I'll make it for the English audience, looks like he plays soccer for the Premier Soccer League. It's not happening. He's supposed to be developing across 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Young girls are supposed to be menstruating between the ages of 15 and 17, not 9 to 10, like we see in many of our schools in the UK and the US. And the truth is, even in women that menstruate before the age of 13 have about a 30% increase in the risk of breast cancer as adult women. Well, when you're eating these animal products and dairy products, you're fostering those reproductive hormones at a much higher level earlier on. And you're fostering a level of obesity. And think about this, in fat cells, the body has an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. So as you increase that body fat in both females and males, you're triggering more higher estrogen exposure to tissue, which will trigger abnormal growth. And over time, that abnormal growth can be tumor and cancer growth. So there's no place for fostering these foods that have no natural place in the human constitution or in the human population for health purposes and weight loss purposes. But then when you look at the industries producing them and you see the violence and the lack of compassion and empathy that's involved and the devastation that that's providing to the climate is ungodly. And again, I want to emphasize, we spend so much time in our culture even in these big international panels focusing on the burning of fossil fuels as a major contributor to abnormal climate change, when we know that that is a contribution, but the 90%, almost 90% contribution to abnormal global warming and climate change is our dependency on animal food production. And that includes meat and dairy products.
Thank you. That's so powerful and so incredibly helpful and inspirational. I think it's so important to set everything out in the way that you have. We touched on this a little earlier, and it's kind of an ontological question, really, in a way, which is like you've got this incredible book that you've written, but how do we know that we know? How do we know that what you're saying is right? For example, you and I both have many friends in common on social media and in this field. We have friends who are bodybuilders, for example, and they're huge and they're fantastic and they're healthy and so on. And of course, the naysayers, the critics, the armchair warriors, the keyboard warriors, in their mum's basement, are sort of saying, "Oh yeah, but you've only been vegan for like a couple of weeks because you packed on all that muscle before you went plant-based, or you won't last." And obviously, that's absolutely not the truth at all. So what I wanted to circle back and ask you about is, and you did actually say, how long you've been plant-based. And I want to talk to you about not just you and your sort of your vitals, how well you are, but also the people that you look after, the people that you've looked after for decades and decades, whole families, generations of families. Can we talk about that and the health transformation and weight loss and so on that they've actually been able to accrue for themselves?
Yeah, let me start off with something that you began with the question, and that is, as you know, what the CMA stands for, and of course, me being part of that as science and research director, is we're all about the evidence base, and you know that. And again, there's too many people that want to speak completely anecdotally about what they feel is real. And I want to really emphasize that while I have a huge clinical experience and a huge personal experience in success with the plan that I presented in this book, I went out of my way to reinforce and to really share the evidence base in this book for what we're talking about. Because I really felt that it was incumbent upon me to let people realize that this is just not a short story that has been made up by me and other people trying to push a vegan agenda. When we look at the data is so overwhelmingly strong over the past plus 75 plus years to really highlight, whether it's in the studies in Framingham or the Epic Oxford in England or the Adventist two diets across United States and Canada or the Suchi diets with the Buddhists in Taiwan. We see such extensive, we're talking about thousands and thousands of research papers, hundreds of thousands of human beings that have been looked at from the standpoint of omnivorous versus plant-based food consumption and lifestyle. And we see unbelievably remarkable changes in health outcome that we see with no other eating plan. I'm going to just say that right out of the blocks because people need to understand that what we're seeing in families, what we're seeing in lives like mine or yours or people that have really adopted this over a long period of time is just incredibly consistent with the evidence base. And the beautiful thing is, while people have adopted this way of living sometimes decades ago, the evidence base has really caught up a little bit more now with what we have actually seen anecdotally. And
Yeah.
that is a plant exclusive approach is the only way to go in the human population. So I have counseled people that have been raised from birth and they're in their 70s now living and eating this way. As I told you, I myself really started getting rid of all animal products in the early 1970s. I got rid of all the flesh foods, and then probably all the dairy was a little bit later, toward the end of that decade. So now it's almost 47 years as a complete vegan. And so my level of performance, my level of activity, and understand the last visit to a doctor I really had for anything other than an emergency, a small emergency situation, was probably 60 years ago. I have not been on a drop of medication throughout my entire adult life. I'm in my early 70s, performing and functioning at a level that I never really thought possible, never really thought I would even live this long, going back in time. But the fact of the matter is, what I see in me is something I see in many people that adopt this approach. And this is very, very important because, this is the game changer. It's not only about being athletic at an early stage in your life, but it's how do we promote the quality of life? How do we promote that incredible improvement in biological age at any chronological age of our lives? How do we function in our 70s and 80s with high performance? And, many people are aware of these blue zone cultures that have basically adopted a lot of this way of eating and living to the ages of 100 plus very functionally. That's why we've replaced the idea in many ways of lifespan with this idea of health span. How are we going to maintain optimal health and performance even in those latter years of our lives? I mean, you think about it in conventional cultures, UK, the United States, think about this, a simple function. After the age of 40, 50% of men deal with some form of erectile dysfunction. Losing sexual potency in their 40s. When we see people adopting this way of living and eating, maintaining that performance in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's all about blood supply, opening blood circulation to vital organs, whether in this case, it's organs in the genitals and organs of reproduction. But the truth is, when you improve that blood supply, when you open those blood vessels, when you're keeping those nutrients flowing in such a dynamic way, it's remarkable how we reverse some of the most glaring pathologies. And this is important because for the longest time, people felt that chronic disease not only was not really preventable, in no way was it reversible. Now we know that that's completely untrue. Not only is it preventable, but most of the major devastating conditions, whether it's heart disease, type 2 diabetes, et cetera, are absolutely reversible. And the truth is, it comes back fundamentally to understanding the role of plant nutrition, but then embracing other lifestyle factors that we know are critical. And in my book, I go through some of what those are, whether it's sleep and exercise and environmental concerns, but also community and relationships. And so I get into psycho-emotional factors also related to addiction and all of that. But the bottom line is this approach, we see it that when it is put into people's lives, we see such sustainable, remarkable benefits over long periods of history that we do not see with people adopting fad approaches that involve high animal protein, high animal fat. It just does not work that way. The bottom line is those become long-term risk factors. I'll give you one simple example in data, which is really important. When the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research did a prospective epidemiological look at a human population across a 30-year period from 1960s, mid-60s to the mid-1990s. And they found that even marginal fat and weight gain across that period, and that was looked at with body mass index, which I will agree is not the best measurement, but it is one that is used. They saw that even marginal changes in weight and body fat went up in a kind of a dose response increase for every known form of cancer that we can talk about, including pancreatic, colorectal, breast, and even blood cancers like leukemia. It led them to state that if you want to reduce the risk of cancer in the Western world, you need to be eating a diet on average that is probably made up 90% plus of foods that are less than 600 to 700 calories per pound. That is only fruits, vegetables, and starches. That means, according to those major cancer councils, to really reduce cancer risk and keep weight in the levels that are going to be sustainable and healthy, that diet needs to be 90 to 95% from foods that are only in the categories of fresh fruit, non-starchy green vegetables, and starches, and a small amount coming from higher fat foods like nuts, seeds, things of that regard. So the data is so strong on sustainable weight cancer outcome, chronic disease for embracing an eating plan that provides low calorie density, not high animal foods, high in fat and protein, not diets that are 65 to 90% fat like keto diets that increase insulin resistance, reduce energy, create other damage across time. So the database, in addition to the anecdotal observation of people that have been doing this over time, and the long history of data that has been collected from multiple studies across the world, just constantly reinforces this way of living as the approach for creating that sustainable solution to the pandemic of obesity and body fat.
Yeah, thank you. You've put it so brilliantly, and you've laid it out from the from the epidemiological side of things, the data, the research, the evidence base, and so on. But I think something very important about this book is that it's weightless, but it's compassionate weight loss for life. Can you talk to that, Frank? Because people know you through the CMA. People know you as our science and research director, and I imagine that they probably think of you as sort of living in some sort of lofty ivory tower, doing experiments and wonderful things and so on, researching and writing and such. But actually, you spend the majority of your time with people, helping people, counseling people, supporting them, real individuals. You touched on it earlier about the people that you've looked after over the years, but can we now talk about why you've chosen to call this compassionate weight loss for life?
Yeah, I've kind of alluded to this so far in our conversation, but when we look at the lifestyle that I'm recommending, and again, you make a very important point, and I address this right in the introduction to the book. I'm not sitting in some ivory tower. I've been through my own history of addiction. I've been through my own history of overweight, even as a child, going into my teenage years. So I've dealt with the dark night of the soul related to a lot of those demons that we all encounter at different stages in our lives and in different ways. So what I discovered was that this way of living and eating had such a powerful impact on helping me address those issues, helping me find my balance point, my place of happiness, function, etc., within the context of a life that I was really not brought up in. I was brought up in a conventional Italian household. I was brought up to eat dairy and meat and all the things that people are brought up to eat. And I discovered it through my own path and my own journey. And when it did, it resolved major pathological changes in my own life. I dealt with ulcerative colitis as a child, a lot of colon issues and so on that were completely healed and renovated by just moving into this eating plan. And when I started really counseling people, and you make a point, I still run monthly health retreats where we're feeding people and doing water fasting and doing different things to help people embrace this lifestyle and recover. The truth of the matter is, what we need to do in the face of the oppressive forces and industries that are producing food and really addicting people to foods that are literally killing them with disease and obesity, is that we need to understand that this approach is not just a food approach. It is a philosophy, it is a psychological and nutritional approach that is grounded in some very important features, the highest ideals of human behavior. And that really is compassion, empathy, and love. And when I bring up a word like spirituality, it kind of makes some people's hair on their body kind of stand up. I want to really differentiate spirituality from religiosity, because it's not religion. Spirituality can be defined in a way as having some concern, some consciousness, some awareness of the consequences of what we individually do and how those consequences affect everything around us. Nothing addresses that connection like this vegan, whole food, plant exclusive approach. So when I say that, it means that, when you and I eat, the consequences of what we choose to put on our plates is not confined by the borders of our own individual kitchens. It has a huge impact on the industries that are producing food, on the environment that is dealing with the repercussions of those industries and our food choices. Nothing brings us into that connect like this way of eating. And I really, frankly, got very tired and appalled by people constantly trying to share diets and eating plans and lifestyles for weight loss that did not take into account the understanding of those consequences. The idea that, we are spiritual beings that have a sense. These are deep rooted things in our consciousness. No one has to tell us about compassion and love and empathy. These are things that we naturally express in seeing someone hurt or understanding someone else's pain or feeling what they're going through, whether it's your own child or a person you know or love or whatever. So when we talk about eating and living this way, I wanted to present an approach that I knew had the greatest impact on helping people create sustainable success in health and weight regulation and weight control and weight loss, but at the same time, embracing those issues, those consequences that are now also going to support the rights and lives of animals around us, all animals, and the protection of the natural environment in which we live. Because the truth is, if we don't do that now, we are not going to survive as a species. It's really that simple for me. And my tolerance and threshold for that has gotten a lot lower as I've gotten older, because there's a part of me that wants to really address those issues and kind of shake it up a little bit and get people to realize that, hey, when you make a choice for your weight loss and how you eat or live, you have to understand there's a consequence to that choice. And if you're feeding industries of devastation and destruction and violence, where is that getting us as a world and so we're trying to create not only sustainable, healthy weight, not only health, but we're trying to create a compassionate, loving world, in my mind. And so to me, that's why I wrote this book. That's why you'll see in it whole chapters on environmental consequence. And you'll see, whole chapters on the psycho-emotional factors of how we connect to each other and how we integrate into the world and how all of that plays a role in our health and weight regulation. And I don't know any book and I don't know anybody that's taken the stand to try to accomplish that in a book like I've produced. Because this book provides all of those factors with that consciousness of compassion and connection. And that's why, for me, fundamentally, this book is really about love and connection as much as it is about the dynamics biologically and physiologically that promote effective weight loss across time. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it really does. It makes complete sense, Frank. Again, I think this is another reason, perhaps, why Colin Campbell and I think all of us who've read this book actually believe that this is an unusual. It's unique. It's completely unusual because you've really brought the whole picture to play, and I think this is absolutely crucial for everybody. I think it's really important at this point just to say that as far as I'm concerned, I believe that this book is not just useful for people who wish to lose weight, who want to shed some of that adiposity, but it's also vital reading, recommended reading from the CMA, of course, to all of our members.
Well, let me add one thing to it too, Jayney, because I know this has felt a little bit heavy at times. I want them to understand that the book also has so many effective strategies day to day to make it fun and useful. So it's got exciting recipes. It's got whole chapters on eating out in the real world. How do we take advantage of the ethnic cultures that have been utilizing foods of this kind for centuries? How can we embrace this cultural connection to feed ourselves in a way, to inform our bodies with food in a fun way when we're eating out? So it's got a lot of very effective strategies in how we put food together, how we prepare food, how we share food, how we incorporate other cultures in utilizing this kind of nutrition. And even in the chapters, the chapter on stress, it even talks about, and we get into this idea of how the repetitive choices that we make in this regard are also feeding a kind of plasticity in our brains and nervous systems that actually transform us into the compassionate beings that we are capable of becoming? How do we reweave the tapestry of our own brain and nervous system in our choices and how we handle the stressful events of our lives? So there's so many people. This book could have been a lot of different books, but I'm going to say it straight out. When I wrote this, I wrote it with the idea that if I died tomorrow, all of this information would be in one place. So it is somewhat encyclopedic, but it allows you to tap in on so many levels in so many different ways to address those pieces of our lives that play a role in this weight loss story that too often have been overlooked or not addressed in any way, shape, or form.
Well, that's really why I was saying it's a fantastic book for people who want to lose weight, but it's also, I think, required reading for members of the CMA, practitioners who are dealing with clients that they wish to help. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is the Bible, and because you have, as you say, it's like everything and the kitchen sink. You really have put everything in there, which is fantastic. You're right, it's a mighty tome, but it's readable. I mean, this is the funny thing. I said to you when I was lucky enough to sort of start to read through various chapters and so on, it is actually a page turner. It's really, I love your prose. You write beautifully anyway, and because of that, you make it easy. It's not a chore to have to go through this book. I think so many of us, because we're all addicted to our screens, and we're kind of after this, like it's like fast food, fast information. And very few people actually sit down these days to actually sit and literally read a book. I think that's different for practitioners because we are kind of trained that way, so we're more inclined to. But it's a book. It's very accessible. I think that's really what I'm trying to say. The information in the book, while it's incredibly brilliantly evidence-based, stunningly well researched, it is a page turner, and you can get through it very easily and enjoyably. And I think you've done a fantastic job. It's an absolutely sterling effort, Frank. We're just very lucky to have you I'm particularly lucky to have you in my life on a personal level as my sweetheart, but also, from the Complementary Medical Association side of things. We are incredibly lucky to have you on side with us because you bring such brilliance and excellence to bear. And so I know that everybody watching will be saying, hats off to you, Frank, because you bring an awful lot to the party. I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there. If we have questions from the viewers and listeners and so on, we can always come back and bring you back on. I'm sure we will do, either on this or other things as well in the future.
It'll be my pleasure. And let me just make a statement that I am absolutely grateful to be part of the CMA myself, because the truth is, it has always stood for the highest standard of complementary care and medicine, and that's what drew me to it, and why I agreed to become the science and research director, because of the high standards that you've set over all of these decades. So I'm very proud and grateful to be part of it too.
Oh, thank you. That really means a lot. Yeah, and by uniting in this way, we can just move this whole sector further and further on, and that's what we're doing together. So thank you, Frank. It's been absolutely amazing to be able to have this discussion with you. It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the time, and thank the audience too. Thanks everybody out there.